it's Reed from Blue Bear Quilts, and today I'm asking the question, would you like to make a Rockstar quilt? This is the Rockstar Quilt, and it's made with a new fabric line from QT Fabrics called Rock and Roll Fantasy. Shops can order it until August 15th of 2024, and it will be available in quilt shops along with the pattern in November of 2024. So let me show you some of the fabrics and quilting up close. There's all these wonderful guitar images that are part of a panel. And then we have what's called the X block and the shoe fly block. And the quilting was done by Copper Penny Quilting in Clearwater, Florida. And she used a music design that has clef notes and sharps and flats and all kinds of different musical symbols. And so this is the Rockstar quilt using QT Fabrics Rock and Roll Fantasy. And now I'll show you some more fabrics on the back. I used 4 different fabrics on the back that are part of the collection. 3 of them are not in the front of the quilt, 1 of them is. There's this really cool one that has all of these different guitars on it. And then there's this one that has guitars with other things like amplifiers and pianos and saxophones and drum sets. And then down here we have all of these really colorful, almost mosaic guitar picks. And then in this panel we have the light tan spiral circles that's also on the front of the quilt. Here are some of the supplies that you will need in order to make the Rockstar quilt. First of all, you're going to need the pattern Rockstar by Blue Bear Quilts. Some pins will definitely come in handy. Some type of a marker will be necessary because you're going to be marking the back of fabrics. And because it's on the back, it doesn't really matter. You could use something like a Frixion pen that will iron away, or you could even use a pencil because it's going to disappear when you cut the fabric. A snips will definitely come in handy. You're going to need a rotary cutter. You'll need some type of a straight edge ruler like this one from Creative Grids called Quick Trim and Circle Ruler. And this pattern is written so that you can totally cut out the pieces and make it with regular rotary cutting using your rotary cutter and a straight edge ruler. But you also can make the various units that are necessary in this quilt with some tools from Studio 180. So this wing clipper tool will definitely come in handy. It's wing clipper 1. And another one from Studio 180 is the Tucker trimmer. This one will help with making the half square triangles, and the wing clipper will help with making the flying geese units. And the reason I like using these is that they create units that are slightly oversized, and then you trim them down. And it also makes multiple units at a time, so it goes much quicker and you end up with much more precise units because of the trimming down. You're also going to need some straight edge rulers. This one that's 6 inches by Quilter Select is a good one. And then you need a little bit larger one. This one is 9 inches by OmniGrid. And of course you're going to need the fabrics. One of the fabrics is a panel piece, and I've already started to cut this one apart, but there were 20 of these different guitar images on the panel, and I'm going to show you how I cut the panel apart and get this to the correct size in a little bit. This particular fabric is going to be the border fabric, and it's really fun. You can see that it has guitars, it has record albums, it has different musicians. Here's a musician with an afro, here's a female musician. They almost look like they're musicians from maybe the 60s and 70s. There are 3 different shades of this spiral circle pattern, and each one has a light, medium, and dark. So you can see this one has a light, medium, and dark tan. Then this one's kind of a brown copper color. and then there's a purple one. They're all really, really beautiful, very nice textured fabrics. Then the quilt also uses a couple different tone-on tones. This one's in a teal color, and you can see it has musicians in the fabric. So it's really, really cool that these musicians are kind of hidden in this tone-on-tone image. And then we're also using one in pink that also is tone-on-tone and has those musicians in it. So this fabric line that I'm using to make the Rockstar Quilt is from QT Fabrics, and it's called Rock and Roll Fantasy. The last date that quilt shops will be able to order this fabric and get it in their shops is August 15th, 2024. So if you really like this pattern and like this fabric line, be sure to contact your quilt shop and ask them if they're ordering this fabric line from QT Fabrics called Rock and Roll Fantasy. The Rockstar Quilt pattern and the fabrics will be in shops on November 28th, 2024. So if you really like this pattern and like these fabrics, be sure to put that date on your calendar, because that's when you'll be able to get this pattern and that fabric line at your local quilt shop. So now the next thing is I'm going to show you how I cut the panel piece apart and then trim it up to the correct size. So when you get the panel piece, it's a large piece, usually about a yard times width of fabric, which is 42 inches. So it's typically like 36 inches by 42 inches. And this particular panel had 20 different guitar images on it. So this happens to be one. So the first thing you have to do is you have to cut the panel apart. There's this, black trim in between the panel pictures, and depending on the size that you need to cut this, it's possible that there could be like a 1/4 inch or more of the black around. So you'd have to make sure that you have enough left over when you cut in between the panels for the size you need. So for this particular quilt, we need 5.5 and 6.5 inches. So the smaller one is going to be 5.5. So I always want to make sure there's going to be enough before I do it. So you can see that the inside is 6 inches. So there definitely is going to be enough to cut out the 5.5, which is going to be that smaller section in the middle. And then for the 6.5 inch ones, you're going to need at least 6.5, and you can see that this image is about 7 inches, so there definitely is 6.5 as well. So that means I feel perfectly comfortable cutting in between each one of those pictures and not having to worry about whether I'll have enough black surrounding it to have that 1/4 inch that may be necessary. So the first thing I do is I cut the individual blocks like this, and then I want to cut them into the various sizes that they need to be. So for this pattern, we need 10 of them to be 6.5 inches, and we need 10 of them to be 5.5. So I used the larger square up ruler for the 6.5, and so if I put it right there, you can see that the half is there, leaving a 1/4 inch around that white line. There's also a 1/4 inch over here. If I move this up there, there's a 1/4 inch at the top, and now the 6.5 inch line is down here, so there also is a 1/4 inch on the bottom. So what I would do is if I was cutting the 6.5 is I would lay the ruler as I've done here. I would trim here and here, and then I would rotate the piece 180 degrees this way, and then I would put the actual 6.5 intersection where 6.5 and 6.5 meet. I would put that intersection right on where I just cut, which I'm not doing it on this one because I actually need this one to be 5.5, which I'll demonstrate next. And then I would go and trim the other two sides like that. So that's how I would do it for the 6.5. And then we also need 10 at the 5.5. And a rotating mat can come in handy because then you can get the fabric at the exact angle you need to cut, whether you're right-handed or left-handed. So this is a 6-inch ruler and I need 5.5. And so that means we're going to be cutting, since this image with the white is almost exactly 6 inches, because we need this to be 5.5, we're going to be cutting inside the we'll be cutting inside of this white line in order to get a 5.5-inch square. So we're going to look at whether or not we have equal amounts all the way around. So here's the 5.5-inch line. Excuse me, I'm sorry, my voice is a little raspy today. And so there's a little bit there. I would say it's about 1/8 of an inch. It looks like there's about 1/8 of an inch there at the top, about 1/8 of an inch here on the left-hand side. Excuse me. And then on the bottom, the 5.5-inch line is also right here, which means that we're also leaving about 1/8 of an inch. So when I flip this, I'm definitely going to have room on these other two sides to still be doing some trimming. So I'm going to make these first two cuts. I typically start here and go backwards and then go forward. And then I'm going to rotate this so that it's a little bit easier for me to cut. And then I cut that piece off. And now we take and rotate this 180 degrees, so it's upside down, and now we put the 5.5 and 5.5 intersection right on those lines that we previously cut. So the 5.5-inch line is along here on the right, and it's also along here on the bottom. And when you're lining up your ruler, there are typically spaces between the black lines, and you want to be able to see the color of fabric in those spaces in between. So in other words, the dots on the ruler are kind of riding right on the middle of the cut line. So if there were dots on this ruler, half of the dot would be on the fabric side and half of the dot would be off of the fabric side. And that's how you excuse me, that's how you get your ruler in the correct place when you're lining it up on your fabric. So I think I've got this one lined up pretty good. And now I will cut the other two sides and rotate this. And now we have the 5.5-inch square that's needed for some of the blocks. So next we will start making the pieces that go around the panel pieces. And I'll take a drink of water, so hopefully my voice will be a little bit better. So the first block that we're going to make in this quilt, which will be 10 of the blocks, is the shoe fly block. And you can see that it has squares in these center sections, and then it's surrounded by half square triangles. So we're going to make those half square triangles using the Tucker trimmer tool. The first thing you need to do is you need to have two squares of fabric that are the same size. We're going to be making these pink and tan ones first. And you can also see that we need 8 of them. So using the Tucker trimmer helps because we get more half square triangles quicker than just making them, sewing them one at a time. So you need 2 squares that are basically the same size, and you put them right sides together. I'm putting the lighter tan one on top, and then I take my ruler, and from point to point I draw a line from point to point. And then once I've done that, I sew 1/4 inch away from that line on both sides. And on my machine I have a foot that's called a 1/4 inch foot, and it has like a little black ledge that you ride the edge of the fabric up against in order to get a 1/4 inch. Well, if I place that black line on the foot right on this black line as I'm sewing, I get a stitch that's a 1/4 inch away from the line, and so that's how I'm able to accurately get those stitches a 1/4 inch away from that line, and then I just flip it and do the same thing. Ride that black line on my foot along that again, and then I get another 1/4 inch. And so you can see that I have the black line and stitch on either side. So then we take our ruler and we put it on those corners and on the black line. And we're just going to cut right on that line that we made. And we did it with a pencil because it doesn't matter because we're cutting it anyway. And even if you don't cut it exactly on the line, it'll still be fine. So we do that and we end up with 2 pieces like that. I've cut another one. There again, we have 2 pieces like that. So we take them to the iron and we press them towards the pink side. And then this is where the tucker trimmer comes in. So you can see that by putting the 2 squares together, and the ruler comes with this guide that will tell you, in here there's a chart, a square size chart, and so it tells you what size the squares need to be in order to get a certain size half square triangle. So you look in the chart, like the pattern will say you need a 4.5 inch finished, well no, not finished, unfinished. Nope, it starts with finished. So if you need a 4.5 unfinished, you need a 4 inch finished. And so the it's telling you that then you would need 5 inch squares for the half square triangles. So the chart tells you what size the squares need to be. And then once you've pressed these to the dark, you then take and put the tucker trimmer on there for the particular size that you want this to end up. Now this one happens to end up at 2.5 inches. So I'm putting the 2.5 inch line right on that seam line between the pink and tan. And then you can see that there's a line going around here and there's fabric on either side of it. There's also fabric on the outside that needs to be trimmed off, and that's what you want to look for. You want to make sure that your finished size, this isn't finished in the quilt, but finished for the purpose of cutting is going to be 2.5 inches. So you want to make sure there's fabric all the way around the ruler. And then I'm going to take and trim off this side and rotate this and trim off this side. Okay, then once again I'm going to take and rotate the piece 180 degrees, and now I take the 2.5 inch line and put that on the 2 edges that I just cut. And once again, these dashes, there's spaces in between, and you want to make sure that the cut line of the pink is basically lining up with those dashes, and that's how you know that you have it in the correct place. And then I'm going to cut the remaining 2 sides. And then you end up with a really nice half square triangle just like that. And so here I have 2 of them that have been cut. And they are good to go. So there is one other half square triangle in this block, and it's this brown and teal, and it's basically the same size. So again, it starts with the 2 squares together, right sides together. I've put the teal on top. I've put a line down the middle. I've sewn on either side. When I cut them in half, they look like this. I'm going to take and press them to the teal side, and what that means is that you put the teal on top, you press down with your iron. It's not ironing, it's not this motion, it's pressing, which is going to flatten that seam nice. And then you take and you finger press it, and again you take with your iron and press, and you can rub up against that seam edge slightly, but don't really push it hard because that will end up stretching the fabric. So when I've pressed those, and for these, just because of the way they happen to go around the block, 50% of these need to be pressed to the teal side and 50% need to be pressed to the brown side. So you press one each way. And then when I've trimmed those up, I end up with nice, perfect half square triangles that look like that. So the real advantage of the Tucker trimmer tool is that you get multiples at a time and that they're slightly oversized so that when you trim them down, you end up getting a perfect half square triangle so the points are right where they belong. And when you get units that are the correct size, it helps because as you sew more and more pieces together, the more accurate these individual pieces are, the more accurate your overall block is going to be. So those are the half square triangles that go around the shoe fly block, and then next I'll show you the next segment in constructing this block. Now we have our half square triangles, and they've been pressed towards the pink side, and they go on either side of a square. And so notice how the half square triangles are oriented, and we sew this together, and then we're going to press towards the square. So when we do that, we end up with a unit like this. You can see they've been pressed towards the square, and we need two of them. And they go on either side of the larger panel pieces that were cut. So it goes like that and that. And we sew both of those on, and then we're going to press it towards the panel piece. And so when we've, oh, I guess I didn't show that, sorry. So sew one on either side like that. And then we're going to press it towards the panel piece. And when we've done that, it looks like this. And you can see on the back they've been pressed to the panel piece. So the next thing we have to do is add side units on, and the way we construct those is we take one of these, and then we need the ones that have been pressed towards the teal and the ones that have been pressed towards the brown, and one of each one of these will nest with the other one. So one goes like this, and if I put them like that, that's the wrong one. So it's the other one. So the ones that are pressed to the brown get placed here, and then you line it up like that, and when you put them together, they nest. See how that one is going that direction and this one's going that direction? They nest, and we're going to sew that along there. Then we take the other one, that is the one that's been pressed to the teal, and it goes like this. And then you can see how those two nest, because this one's going this direction, this one's going the other direction, and we sew it along there. So when we've done that, they end up looking like this. And they're going to go on either side of this unit. So one goes like this, one goes like this, and you can see how it's creating the shoe fly, and we have these rotating half square triangles on the outside. And so when it's all completed, it looks like that. And when you follow the pressing directions, you're going to end up something that looks nice and flat like this on the back. So that's how we sew together the horseshoe blocks. And then the next block is called the X block, and I will show you how that one is put together. This is the X block, which is the other block in the Rockstar Quilt. And there are 10 of these blocks, and they use the smaller panel piece that's been cut out, and it's called the X block because you can see this kind of looks like an X going around it. If it was this way, it might be called the plus block or the cross block, but it's actually oriented this way in the quilt, so I called it the X block. It is comprised of half square triangles. There's one here, here, and then there are two on both sides. So let me show you how this block is constructed. And again, it can be done with regular rotary cutting and sewing the pieces together one at a time, but I'm going to be using the Studio 180 wing clipper, which will make multiple flying geese units at a time. So we start off with a larger square. You can see that this background square is larger, and then there are these two smaller squares that are placed on top of it. And the wing clipper again has a chart in it that gives you the measurements for what the large and small squares need to be. So that you know which goes where. In the X block, in a flying geese unit, this part here is called the goose, and this part on either side is called the sky. So for this particular block, and there's two different ones, so notice in this one, the goose is the tan fabric. In this one, the goose is the purple fabric. So we have 4 purple geese and 2 tan geese. And then where the purple geese have a tan sky and the tan goose has purple sky. So this particular one, I'm making a set of 4. So from this, we're going to end up with 4 flying geese units, and because this large square is purple, it's going to be the goose, and these tan fabrics that are on it are going to be the sky. So you take and place the 2 smaller squares like this, and in both corners, and then they overlap, and you want there to be like a slight, like the slightest, like about 1/8 of an inch on the edge. I don't have it very good on that one. It's better on this one. You can see that there's like a little 1/8 of an inch on either side, and that's where you want to place these. And then when you get them on there, you want to take your ruler and you want to draw with your pencil a line from point to point. So you just take your pencil and draw a line. And again, because it's going to be cut, it doesn't matter if you use a pen, a pencil, whatever tool you use to mark it. And so then I don't want these pieces to shift when I'm sewing, so just like on the half square triangles, I then went to my machine and with my 1/4 inch foot sewed a 1/4 inch all the way on either side of that line. And then once you've done that, the pieces are now secure. You can take the pins out. And we're going to take and now cut on the line. So the pieces have been sewn, they're secure, and we're going to take and cut all the way through that entire line. So we're going to cut from point to point. And we end up with 2 pieces that look like this. And you take them to your iron board and you basically press them. You press the sky fabric up like this. So again, you take your iron and you would press, then you would finger press, and again you would press, and you can slightly bump up against that edge with your iron, but be careful not to distort the pieces. So we had a piece that looked like this. It's now been cut in half, and we have these 2. So what do those pieces look like when they've been pressed? They look like this. So we now end up with 2 pieces that look like that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take each one of these pieces and we're going to put another square on them, just like this. So we're now placing another piece of sky fabric, another square sky fabric, on this corner of one of these units. And we do it to both of the units. I'm just showing you one right now. And again, we want there to be like a 1/8 of an inch of the purple showing. And we draw a line down the middle, and so 1/4 inch on either side. And then we're going to take and cut on that line and cut these apart. And remember, there are 2 of these. I'm only showing you 1, but there are 2 of them. So we end up with pieces that look like this. And so if we did the other one, we're going to have 4 pieces that now look like this. And then we take and go to our iron, and again we press and finger press, and voila, we have a flying geese unit. So you're going to do that to all 4 of those units that came from these 2 units. So we had these 2 units, which gave us these 4 pieces that now look like this. And when we press them, they're going to look like this. So we end up with 4. Now these have already been trimmed up, but so you end up with 4 flying geese units from that. You start with 1 large goose square and 4 smaller sky fabrics, and that gives you all 4 of these. So then we use the Tucker trimmer, or I'm sorry, the wing clipper ruler to trim these up. And so in order to do that, we start, for me being left-handed, we start with the goose pointing that direction. And the instructions do give both right and left-handed instructions. So when you get this tool, it's really important to keep these instructions. So I'm going to do that, and then you look for like what the unfinished measurements of these are, and it's this one I think is like 3 by 5.5. And so you put the 3-inch line there, and you put the 5.5-inch line down here, and then you look for this little intersection right here. You can see that there are 2 lines and they're making a point, and you want this line to line up with this seam line and this line to line up with this seam line. And then we're going to trim 2 sides. So we're going to trim here, and then I'm going to rotate this, and I'm going to trim this side. Okay, then we're going to take and rotate this 180 degrees, and now we're going to actually concentrate on putting the 3-inch line over here on this cut line and the 5.5-inch line on that bottom cut line. And I don't have a whole lot left over, but there's a little bit. So you can see there's not very much waste. And we're going to trim up these other 2 sides. So there's this side, and then I'm going to rotate this and trim this side. And there we have a perfectly trimmed up flying geese unit. So I'll repeat that one more time for you. Again, we start for left-handed people with the goose going to the right. And I'm going to line up the 3-inch line on here and the 5.5-inch line towards the bottom. And I'm going to look for where those 2 lines intersect right there and put them right on the point. And then I want, see how there's that line? I want that line to be on the seam line, and I want this bottom line to be on the seam line. Oops. And when I get them lined up, okay, we're ready to trim 2 of the sides. So we're going to trim these first 2. Trim along that side. Then I'm going to rotate this, trim along the top. Okay, then we're going to rotate that and now put the 3-inch line on one side and the 5.5-inch line on the other side. And also, I didn't point it out last time, but there is like another little X up here that you line up this time, and then I have a little bit of fabric to trim up on these remaining 2 sides. So trim along here, and trim along here, and never remove the ruler until you're sure that you've actually got your cuts made, because It's hard to get it lined up in the exact same spot again. So there is another perfectly trimmed up flying geese unit. So from that one large square and 4 tan squares, so one large purple and 4 tan, we end up with these 4 perfectly sized, perfectly trimmed up flying geese units. And for the ones that are on the top and bottom, like this where the goose is tan, is just the reverse. The large square is tan, the goose fabric is tan, and the sky fabric is going to be the purple. So it's just a reverse of what I just did. So that's how the flying geese units are created. So the next step is we take our smaller panel piece and we put a flying geese unit on the top and on the bottom, and notice how they are oriented. And these are the ones where the geese are tan and the sky is purple. And so when we sew those on, the piece looks like this. And it's pressed towards the panel piece. One thing that you'll notice if you look at the picture of the quilt on the cover of the pattern is that some of the guitar pieces are turned on their sides. So in other words, like you would think that this one goes this way, but it actually went that way. So if you want the quilt to look exactly like the cover, you'll have to pay attention to how some of these panel pieces are oriented, because they're not all oriented up and down. Some of them are oriented sideways. So there we've sewn that on. So the next thing that happens is we sew 2 of the purple geese together, and when we do that, we're going to press this seam open, and that ends up looking like this. So we have the 2 purple geese sewn together, and it's pressed open on the back like that. So we take this piece, and again, you need to pay attention to how the pieces are oriented. The geese are pointing out, and the same thing with this on this side over here. The geese are pointing out. And we sew those 2 pieces on, and again press towards the panel piece. And when we've done that, the piece looks like this. And when you follow the pressing directions, it's going to look nice and neat and flat on the back as well. So that is how the X block is created. So you can see that both the shoe fly and the X block are not that complicated to create, and that with using the Studio 180 wing clipper and Tucker trimmer tools, you can get really accurate results with the units that go together creating these blocks, and you'll end up with really nice blocks when you're done. So the next thing I'm going to do is complete all these blocks and then lay them out and show you how I sew them together in rows. When all of the blocks are sewn, I lay them out 4 blocks across in rows, and then I sew the rows together, and I make sure that each one of the pictures is oriented correctly. And if you want the quilt to look exactly like the cover, you need to pay attention to which guitar picture goes in which square. The beauty of this particular pattern is that even though the seams don't match up from one block to the next, it still creates an interesting pattern. So you can see right here that like this point does not line up with that, and same thing down here, this point doesn't line up with that. But that's is part of the charm of this particular quilt pattern, in that it creates an interesting pattern when those intersections don't meet. So once all of the blocks are sewn together in rows, then I'm going to sew the rows together. And for the individual rows, that first row up at the top, I press that row to the right, then the second row I press to the left, the third to the right, the fourth to the left, and the fifth to the right again. And the reason I do that is so that the blocks where these intersections meet, they will nest with each other, because one is going one direction and one seam is going the other direction. And so when you sew the rows together, I will take and I will just press each row towards the top of the quilt. And when that's done, the quilt top center will be done, and then we'll talk about adding the inner and outer border. The quilt top center is all done. It's 5 rows of 4 blocks across. And I'm now getting ready to add the inner border on, which is teal. And the way I do that is I need to take 3 measurements. The first one would be on the end here. Then I take a measurement right here in the middle. And then I take one more measurement over here on the left-hand side. And I take the average of those 3 measurements, and then that is what I cut my pieces to. Then the same thing is going to be true for down here at the bottom. I take and measure at the bottom. I measure at the top, and then I also measure in the middle and take the average of those 3 measurements, and that's how I get the top and the bottom inner pieces, inner border pieces. The same thing will be true for the outer border. Again, you're going to measure in 3 places, both directions, once the inner border has been placed on, and that will tell you what size to cut your outer border pieces. So I'm going to sew these borders on, and then the next thing I'm going to show you is how to piece 2 sections of border together with a miter. One of the inner border sections has a length of 50.5 inches, and a width of fabric is 42.5 inches, so I need to add another strip in order to get the length I need. So basically what I've done is I've cut one strip that was width of fabric in half, so it's now about 21 inches. And then I have the other one that's the full width of fabric, which is 42. I'm going to cut off the selvage at both ends, or at one end on both of these pieces, and line them up like this. And then I'm going to place it on my cutting mat like that, and then I'm using the Creative Grids Quick Trim and Circle Ruler, and it has these 45-degree lines on it. By placing those 45-degree lines along the left side of these strips, and then placing this 1/4 inch dash line in this upper right hand corner, that will allow me to sew these 2 pieces together and get a perfect miter, and there'll be no dog ears. So you just go like that. They're both right side up, and you take and turn the piece so the 2 pieces meet each other like that. It actually ends up getting flipped kind of perpendicular like that, but now I'm basically going to sew from there to there, from this point to the point you can't see underneath there, and then when I flip this open, it's going to be a perfect mitered border. So that's how you sew your pieces together to get extra length that you need on your borders. It's time to choose a backing fabric for this quilt, and I have 4 different options. The first one is this one that's on a light tan background with guitar picks. They almost look like they're psychedelic guitar picks, but it's a really, really fun fabric. This is the next choice. It's on a tan background with light and medium tan concentric circles in the background, and there are lots of different guitars. Some are acoustic, some are electric. There's some headphones, a microphone, some records. Then the next choice is this one that's on a very light or off-white background. and it appears to have some tan concentric circles on that off-white background. There are some other musical things in this fabric. There are some acoustic guitars and electric guitars and a piano and a drum set, a saxophone, an amplifier, all kinds of fun things on that fabric. And then the last one is this one that has just the concentric circles, and they're in light, medium, and dark tan color. And so I don't have enough fabric in any one of these to use as a backing, so I'm going to combine all four and make a pieced backing that way. And so when I have it done and it's been quilted, I'll show you the back as well. Which one would you choose as your backing fabric if you had a choice? The one with the picks is number 1, with the guitar is number 2, with all the different musical instruments number 3, and then finally the concentric circles number 4. So let me know in the comments which one you would have chosen as your backing, or which one you will choose if you happen to make the Rockstar Quilt or use this fabric line from QT Fabrics. So the quilt has come back from the quilter, and I don't know if you can see it or not, but it has little waves in the quilting and swirls, and there's some notes. I think there are other musicals. There's whatever the hashtag in music is called, and the staff. So different musical elements are in the quilting, and it's now time to trim up the quilt. And so I'm going to show you how I do that. So the border piece was 4.5 inches before it was added to the quilt. So you're going to lose 1/4 inch here, which would make it 4 1/4. But I believe that the quilting shrinks it up even more. So when I measure this, I don't have a full 4 1/4, which would be there, but it's putting it beyond the edge of the border. So I'm going to go with 4 1/8, and the first thing that you need to do is square off the 2 corners. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to lay my quilt on the table here with the cutting mat. I'm going to place this weight on the quilt so that it doesn't slide around on me. Excuse me. And then I'm getting my rotary cutter, and the first thing that I'm going to do is take a square up ruler. This one happens to be a 12.5 inch, and I'm going to place, I'm going to look to see like where I should be. So if I do 4 1/2, or no, 4 1/4 and 4 1/4, which is what that piece should be. 1, 2, 3, 4 1/4. And down here 4 1/4. We're going over the edge by about 1/8 of an inch, and the same thing up here at the top. So I'm going to use 4 1/8 as my measurement. So I'm going to move that down to this border line. And I'm also going to do 4 1/8 on this border line and get that nice and even. And 4 1/8 here. And 4 1/8 along here. And then you can see that's pretty much on the border all the way around. And then I'm going to square up this corner. So you can go like that. And then go like this. And so now that corner is squared up. Then the next step is to go to a regular straight edge ruler now. We're going to take and move this up like this. And we're going to trim along the edge of the border with a straight edge ruler now, as opposed to a square up ruler. So I'm going to take and place this regular straight edge ruler on the border, and again I'm going to place this weight so that my quilt doesn't move on me. And I'm going to look to see that I'm at 4 1/8 up here, and I want to be at 4 1/8 down here, and it goes pretty much 4 1/8 the whole way along. 4 1/8 down here, 4 1/8. So we end up cutting a little bit off, but that's okay. That's where it stretches, you know, with the quilting. And then we're going to just take and inch our way up like that until we get here. And there we go. We've trimmed along that. And so then what I do is I just keep repeating this process. I'm going to go down here until I get to the other end. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take the square up ruler and trim up that bottom corner, and then what I'll do is I'll place the 1 inch and 1 inch on the bottom and look for the 4 1/8 and the 4 1/8 and square up that bottom corner, and then I'll start working along the edge of that border. I don't know if I showed you this on the camera. So I have when I get to the bottom, I put the 1 by 1 marking at the bottom, and I'm going to go in 4 1/8 and 4 1/8 and trim up that bottom border. And then I will take and turn the quilt and trim that bottom edge of the border. And then when I get to the next corner, same thing, I'll use the square up ruler again and do that all the way around the quilt. So that's how I trim up the border once the quilt has been quilted. And then the next process is I will add the binding to the quilt, and then I will show you the completed quilt. I hope you've enjoyed watching me make the Rockstar Quilt using QT Fabrics Rock and Roll Fantasy line. Remember, shops can order it until August 15th of 2024, and it will be available along with the pattern in quilt shops in November of 2024. So if you like this video and would like to see more, be sure to give it a thumbs up. And also, if you hit that bell, you'll be notified when there are new videos. And also remember to hit the subscribe button. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing what you make. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.